Good morning and welcome to News Center. I am Ashley Mazuri. Now this morning, we focus on the ongoing drought. Kenya and other East African nations have been experiencing some of the worst drought conditions in decades, causing crop failure, loss of livestock, wildlife and biodiversity, and malnutrition. The situation is so dire that the UN humanitarian agency has termed the ongoing drought in the region a rapidly unfolding humanitarian catastrophe. We will be speaking to Dr. Guyo Malicha, head of Jameel Observatory, who will be painting a picture of the situation on the ground. But before that, let's look at some of the other stories. Now, 3 suspected armed robbers raided the home of Public Service Cabinet Secretary Aisha Jumwa in Loresho, Nairobi early today. The robbers are reported to have made away with 1.1 million shillings in cash, jewelry, 2 laptops and 3 mobile phones. Police say the robbery took place at 1:45 a.m. when the CS was away on official duties. According to the police at the Spring Valley Police Station, the robbers are reported to have entered the compound by cutting the electric perimeter wall and gained access to the main house through the back door, which was allegedly not locked. The police further say the robbers woke up the CS's 2 daughters before stealing from them. One of the CS's daughters was slightly injured in the right knee during the incident, according to the police report. Away from that, the High Court in Kakamega will today sentence a police officer found guilty of murder. The officer, Patrick Nyapara, was accused of killing Christine Maunga, with whom they had a child in 2019. All right, we want to get Alan Ochanda on that so that he can give us more details. But as we wait for Alan Ochanda, the price of maize flour in the country is likely to remain high due to the ever-increasing price of maize in retailing at between 5,800 and 6,000 shillings in Kiambu and other parts of the country. Maize importers argue that the increasing prices are as a result of dwindling reserves locally alongside high prices in the neighboring countries of Tanzania and Uganda. Now, the importers decry delays by the government to open up a duty-free window for at least 10 million bags of maize imports in a bid to bridge the huge deficit. The importers warn that the price of a packet of flour could rise above 200 shillings.
Kwa hivyo leo ningependa kuongea mambo ya vile nchi inaendelea, hii jua vile imewaka. Tunaona mambo ya gharama ya maisha inaendelea kuwa juu. Tungeomba serikali ifanye mikakati haraka, sababu saa hii tulikuwa tumesikia wakisema wameagiza mahindi gunia milioni 10 ambaye sasa hata sijafika. Tukasikia tena wakisema wataondoa ushuru kwa mahindi, kila kitu, hata kwa mchere, hata kwa maharagwe, hata kwa sukari, na hiyo yote haijafanyika. Kwa hivyo wakati tunaendelea namna hiyo, mambo inaendelea kuwa ngumu na tunaonelea unga itaenda kuwa juu na itaenda kufika hata pahali haijawahi fika.
Mimi naomba tu serikali yetu ingilie kati kwa sababu ya mahindi, ya bei ya mahindi. Tunaona bei imeenda juu sana na imekuwa gumu kwa mwananchi mwenye anategemea unga. Kwa hivyo kwa kweli Kenya yote watu wanategemea unga. Tunaomba serikali ingilie kati na imanage hii mambo ya mahindi. Kwa sasa kama last week mahindi ilikuwa allowed 4200. Right now mahindi imekuwa allowed 58 to 6000. Sasa if in a week time mahindi imeongezeka na over 1600, inaonekana hatuendi vizuri. Inaonekana kila mtu anaenda akifinyika na hii uzito yote itaenda kwa yule mwananchi wako chini kabisa. Kwa hivyo tuomba serikali yetu iingilie for the sake of yule mwananchi wa kawaida wa chini kabisa.
Kulingana vyenye kuko na kulingana vyenye nchi inaendelea, kuna shida. Na hii shida haijaletwa na mtu, ni janga liko. Kuna ukame. Na kukiwa na ukame, serikali uingilia kwa sababu kuna watu wengine ambaye ni watu wa katikati. Hao watu wanatafuta pesa ya kukula kila siku. Sasa unakuta mtu anaenda kutafuta, hata mwenye anaenda kutafuta kwake hana. So inabaki wote wanataka usaidizi. Yani mwenye anapeana kazi na mwenye anapewa kazi hawana hizo resources. So tunaomba kwa unyenyekevu sana, mtukufu rais, tulikuchagua. Kwanza mimi ni supporter wako ule mkubwa. Tulikuchagua na tukasema wewe utadeliver kulingana na mambo ambayo umepitia. At least tunajua kuna mtu mmoja ambaye amepitia kama sisi kutembea bila viatu, ati siku moja atashikilia hii nchi.
The number of pastoralists from Majira County migrating to Garissa County in search of water and pasture continues to rise as leaders urge the president to declare the current drought a national disaster. So far, over 50 families have settled along Modogashe, Garissa Highway with their surviving livestock to seek humanitarian support after losing a good number of their animals. The migration has also affected school-going children who have accompanied their parents to Garissa. Leaders from the county now want the counties affected by the current drought to set aside contingency funds and suspend all other development programs and address the drought factor. They called on the development partners to move quickly before the situation deteriorates to an unmanageable situation.
Hii kuna mahali tatu watu wacha ng'ombe, watu alianza kukufa, hajakufa lakini karibu kukufa. Sasa tunaomba serikali wa Kenya, wale wa siasa wawajia tena, hasa gavana wa Wajia Ahmed Abdullahi na wale wengine wa MB aokoe watu yao. Watu ya Garissa tunarudisha shukrani 100%. Alikaribishwa, aligangana, alifikisha hapo. Sasa wale wa Garissa naye alichoka.
Mimi ni mmoja yao ambaye amepata hiyo msiba. Mwaka 3 tuliopita hatujapata mvua. Hatuwezi kujua kwa nini amenyesha hapa na hakunyesha, hiyo ni kazi ya Mwenyezi Mungu. Tulikuja hapa mwaka 3 tulikuwa nakaa nini ukame. Watu ambao wanakutana hapa, mnaona mashi yenu, wengine wametoka Wajir West, wengine wametoka Elas, wengine wametoka Tarbaji Constitution.
Wajir Constitution, hata kama ni Wajir South, Wajir East, hakuna mtu wa Wajir imebaki huko. Watu yote wafugaji wamekuja hapa, aidha ngamia, ng'ombe, mbuzi, na kila mmoja mahali hako anajua watu wa Wajir walikuja bandia ya Garissa. Walikuja Garissa wakiwa na amebandishwa gari matrela huko, kama ni ngamia au mbuzi au ng'ombe, na wale walibandisha hizo vitu ngamia na mbuzi kwa trela. Ile kila gari imeleta kama watu mbuzi 3 ama 4, hii ingine yote wamekufa juu ya gari.
And that is what we want to discuss this morning, the drought in the country, the ongoing drought, not only in the country but the region. And joining me to have that conversation is Dr. Guyo Malicha, head of Jameel Observatory. Good morning and thank you so much for joining us here on News Center. Now, we've just seen the situation, residents complaining of the ongoing drought, but you work closely with them. What is the situation on the ground? Paint a picture for us.
Okay, thank you for having me. I think the picture is really bad. I think, for lack of a better word, I think it's a bit devastating. If you look at the history of drought in this country, we've having drought, I think, since 1960s. But I think if you look at after the year 2000, the frequency of drought and severity has been higher. Almost 40% of the drought happened after the year 2000. But I think this last drought, the current one, it's unique in the sense that we are facing, unprecedented drought because 5 consecutive rainfall has actually failed, or you say below optimum in our language. And we're looking at the 6th one, which is happening in rain March, April, with very clear accuracy, is almost showing below optimal. So usually pastoral communities, recover between shocks. When drought happen in a row 5-6 times, it takes away that possibility of internal shock absorbing capacity of pastoralist. So this one, I think, if you look at the numbers, they're a bit shaky, but the numbers show that almost between 3.5 to 4 million livestock have been lost, and this is the core livelihood of these people. And of course, almost 1 million children are either malnourished or basically in almost at the verge of being malnourished. And if you look at the population in the entire northern Kenya, we're looking at a huge population of people who are actually going hungry. And that acute food insecurity will still persist if our next March-April rain is still below optimal. So I think in a nutshell, it's a bit devastating because the core livelihood strategy, which is livestock, is diminishing. The income is plummeting. And at the same time also, I think the aid architecture or the aid mechanism is not catching up to help people build, shocks against this drought. So when you bring all that together with food price hike, the Ukraine war, the grain price, and etc., the COVID. So when you look at this drought from 2020 October to now, there are multiple shocks: COVID, Ukraine war, or grain prices, and all these things. When it compounds into a very complex situation that people could not, handle by themselves.
And you've put it rightly that, we've been experiencing drought since 1960. After 2000, the severity kept on increasing. Don't you think by now, as a country, we would have a way of dealing with this drought?
Yeah, rightfully so. I think we should have a way of dealing with drought. I think it's very important to emphasize drought is no longer an emergency. It is a creeping phenomenon that has a very clear pattern. The early warning has improved. It shows, I think, in season out, very clear accuracy of drought emerging. But I think for some reason, our response system is a bit tepid in that we're not designing our response architecture is not aligned to the severity of drought. We're not resourcing our system to respond to drought. So despite early warning increasing, I think as a country where we have missed in this puzzle of prediction, preparedness, and response loop, is our system is not actually, our action is not matching what early warning tells us, and that I think is both sometimes a political decision of ignoring the warning, but also sometimes is a choice of a system that is not taking the severity and the magnitude of this drought in its seriousness it takes. So I think, as you said, we should have done better, I think, in terms of policy and financial instruments to respond to this, resource our systems very well, have better capacity, but then I think we are not yet there, and that's why the severity of drought is even actually hitting us more. Yeah,
from where you sit, so then how do we get there? Because that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I think because at ILRI and where I sit at the observatory, at the Jameel Observatory, we're investing currently in a longer term research project that looks at some of these wicked questions. The wicked question around data for early warning, questions, financing for early action. How do you finance our systems? How do we coordinate our response, mechanism from, let's say, taking an example of Kenya, between the county and the national government systems. So we have commissioned a number of research projects, which actual research project that has an output that will help people to question some of these things. But I think at the national level, we need to change our mindset of how we look at drought, number one. Number two, I think we need to start, resourcing our systems, resourcing our institution that responds to drought better. We need to deepen social security systems. Hunger safety net program is one of those programs that give people cash to purchase food and remain afloat in this time. But I think it has been successful at the pilot phase, but we haven't deepened it, strongly. So I think in the future we need to question some of these missing puzzles in our prediction, diagnostics, response, and implementation of those responses. We really need to go back to the drawing board and say, I think the way we are approaching drought or the way we responding to drought is very traditional in the sense that despite the severity, we have ignored the entire early warning systems. We're always responding at the emergency, and I think it has shown through studies that $1 you invest early enough will save you $2+ at the emergency phase. So we're doing very expensive intervention in drought. We need to go back and say, along the drought cycle, it takes almost 6 months between the normal to the time when drought, reach an emergency. We should do like 50% of our investment should be structured around that. And that conversation, I think, is starting now with government creating, drought emergency fund, which is a pool fund where donors put in money, private sector could put in money. At the same time, government, through its appropriations from the treasury, build that resource, because we need multi-year flexible funding to respond and to have sort of response readiness.
Okay.
Yep.
From listening to you, clearly we have the information, but somewhere along the line we seem to lose it. But then looking at the situation that we're in right now, we have people who are dying, livestock are equally dying. Yes, the government is sending relief food, but do you think that's enough for them?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects about response. There's the humanitarian response, which I think at the moment the only solution we have is how do we step up our humanitarian responses. But I think more importantly, we need to question our drought response design and resourcing going forward. But as of right now, I think we need to have more, more support to the household affected by drought, more food or any nutritional support that should go to people until we come out of this phase. But this is not a solution. This is a short-term solution, and drought being a long-term, event, we're not going back to the good days.
Yeah.
We're actually getting, into more difficult situation going forward. So the most important question is, how do we shift the mindset of the, planners in government offices, people who talk about budget and etc., to look at this in terms of long-term programming? How do we entrench long-term programming into drought responses? How do you build household shock, a response to the drought shocks? This is a question that has to be asked over and over. But I think, of course, it's a mix of short-term and long-term. But I think I'm more really interested in what are we doing in the long term is my big question up to now. And these are the things we invest a bit of research questions around that in coordination with, NDMA and other actors in this research project.
Okay. When you look at drought in general, prediction, preparedness, and response loop, which is broken at this rate, because, residents who are affected with drought don't really have a time to recover from it. So then how do we sort of protect them? Because they have shocks that they're experiencing, and they keep on, it's a trickle-down effect. It's going to continue. How do we help these residents?
Thank you. I think this exact question we should have asked ourselves, 2019, 2018.
Yeah.
Because of the, predictions are very clear. We have 4 or 5 consecutive rainfall, which is looking below optimal. But I think to respond to you, the only way we do this is actually, as at now, right now, I think we need to invest in, the big time investment should be into this social hunger safety net initiative.
Okay.
Because this really gives people meaningful income and money to buy food. The big issue right now is food and livestock fodder and making sure that people survive with the few huts they have. But I think in the long run we need to question around the entire essence of these livelihood systems. How do you position this group of people who are sort of special population in the country in a space that helps them recovery is another question. What do we need to do? Sets of things we need to do at recovery point.
Yeah.
What is the window of recovery? I think restocking people now is a waste of time because you have March, April, below optimal rain. What is meaningful right now is to invest in these, life-saving measures in I think 9 out of 23 counties, which are severely affected by drought.
Yeah.
But I think the other question is we need to question our entire food security arrangement in the country. We have the bread basket of this country, which is one part of the country. Are we investing in the right seed inputs, right infrastructure, right extension services, so that we actually be able to feed people who are in this other part of the country more cost effectively? So that goes into the bigger policy questions around how do we balance the potential within our geographical space between those who can produce crop, have better harvest, because big factor right now is below optimal harvest. So we cannot supply, We've seen in the news most of the time people complaining about, maize price being 5,000, 6,000 per bag, per 90 kg bag.
Yeah.
That's quite high. So, and this all question around irrigation, around potential for production, staple diet, and etc., has to be again back to the table.
Okay, speaking of food security, I'd like to pick your brain on something, because just the other day when the government was distributing, fertilizers, one random Kenyan asked, are our priorities misplaced? Because right now the government is distributing fertilizers. Yes, we don't know if there's going to be rain. Are we sort of in different places?
Yeah, I think in terms of the agricultural side of food production, there are sets of inputs required for you to have an optimal harvest. And I think fertilizer is one of them. Okay. Extension service is another one. Entire soil agronomy and entire soil management and crop management is another thing. So I think for me, fertilizer is a very important question to have a conversation on. But I think there are a bundle of investments that has to go with the fertilizer. Okay. Around extension services, around weed management, around many things. But I think if the next season in certain part of the country show potential for good rainfall, I think and fertilizer in that pocket is seen as a big constraint, then it's something that one can easily have a debate and consider. But I think from my practice in International Fund for Agricultural Development at IFAD and the rest, we look at the band of investment for different areas. Okay. And I think it's not a countrywide it's not a national-wide conversation. Fertilizer don't work in other part of the country, but it's a very important conversation, maybe to have within the maize-producing belt and other, staple food areas.
All right. Looking at that story that we just had before we started this conversation, residents are complaining that we need to stop development programs that are going on so that we can focus on drought. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important. I tell you, when I saw that, it's a very important conversation we're having. The link between the short-term intervention and the long-term development planning is the weakest link in our country. The short-term is what we do on every day, season in, season out. Okay. The long-term development programming would have been actually, if it's well done, that conversation would not have happened. Basically, if you invest an entrenched drought management into the long-term programming, where this is embedded within, as they say in the ending drought emergency, is embedded within the framework and governance in their development programming in those counties at the national level in our investment, then we would have better resilient people. Okay. But now we don't have, we have a weak resilience among this population. So that's why I say, can we rechannel our development funding, because we really need to exist. And food distributions become what we call an emergency, short-term, very urgent intervention. Okay. So it is a conversation we need to have, but I think it speaks to the bigger problem of our drought responses, that we need to mix the two, long-term programming. How do you entrench drought in long-term programming? Yeah. At the same time, how do we build people shock against this thing within the development programming? Okay. Yes.
Around a week or 2 weeks ago, we saw senators who from the ASO region, pushing for the president to declare the drought situation a national disaster. Talk to us about the politics of declaring drought a disaster in this country.
Yeah, I think the thing is, as I said, drought, it comes slowly. It reaches, it takes 6 months before it reaches an emergency point when people's existence and livelihood existence is at stake. At that point, because I think it shows that the position of drought and the issues of drought in the national thinking and the DNA of the government policy and interventions. What it shows is that when you declare drought as a national disaster, it's basically, it doesn't change much. It just brings the attention, the required attention to the drought intervention. Okay. There are people who have never considered drought as an issue. You live in Nairobi, you live wherever you live. And by President declaring that, it sets the machinery of the government and the ministry people to align the little they have to withstand with the declaration of the president. Okay. But then, if you look at it deeply, because I think President Uhuru declared the same, I think, quite a number of years, 2021. Yeah. And now we're pushing President Ruto to do that. It shows actually how this problem has not been addressed. So for me, I think declaring it means basically people will change their priorities and interventions and resources channeled there, but it doesn't offer solution. It offers very short-term solution. In thus, we just need to get some money and redirect resources to buy food. Okay. The better way is, again, what I initially said is, how do we make sure we avoid this point of emergency and drought being an emergency and declared national disaster? At the UN level, in the Horn of Africa, they have declared an appeal for Horn of African drought responses. I think they set a target of around $4 billion. I think by the last time I checked, it's less than half $500,000 in that fund, which means that these things bring the prominence of these issues to the surface, but then it didn't offer solution. Even in the Horn of Africa, many years, this is the same practice within the UN systems and the IGAD systems and the rest.
Okay.
So we need to go back to ourselves and re-question the design and resourcing of our systems for responding to drought, so that we avoid the emergency declaration.
All right, Dr. Guyo, we want to take a break. We'll be back shortly with more news updates, and of course, we'll continue with this conversation. Keep it KTN News.